Hey, Gooey couldn't make it today. Last thing I heard from her was something about a scratch and sniff at the bottom of a pool? Anyway, let's talk about Armored Core. Now, to be honest, I didn't really have too much of an interest in this game, but it's a From Software game. I've been playing their game since Demon's Souls on the PS3, big fan, so this was a chance to try something a little bit different. Now, going into this, I had a couple of goals. Goal number one was to be open-minded. I've never played an Armored Core game before, or a mech game in general. Really had no expectations beyond big Robocop smash. Goal number two, I want to be as objective as possible, making sure to put aside any bias I have towards From Software. And the last goal is to be thorough. Alright, with that out of the way, let's talk about combat and build crafting. Feel of combat is heavily influenced by the way you decide to build your AC, leaving you with tons of different ways to tackle any given encounter. Feel like playing at a faster pace? Well, you could build your AC fast like an annoying wasp, sacrificing some defense for mobility. Maybe you're old and your reflexes aren't what they used to be. Well, you can be a literal flying tank, sacrificing mobility for extra defenses and some bigger guns. Generally speaking, the combat feels pretty solid. You could tell that's where FromSoft put most of their efforts. There's also something really satisfying about flying over the battlefield and getting your missile lock on a bunch of smaller enemies and flying away watching everything explode. Combat really starts to shine though when you're fighting against other ACs. The AI seems to do a pretty good job at keeping you on your toes, and the fight feels similar to fighting an actual person. These encounters with other ACs are where I had the most fun, ended up being a big motivator for trying out new builds. When it comes to building your AC, there's tons of options for parts. I spent a good amount of my time just tinkering with different parts to try to perfect different ideas I had, and I'm happy to say the build crafting in this game is pretty decent. In my PvP matches, I noticed this as well, because over a bunch of the matches I ended up doing, I noticed everyone was doing something a little bit different. One of my favorite moments was the first time I saw somebody using the tank legs with 2 Gatling guns, and it looked so ridiculous watching this behemoth fly around. I was actually laughing out loud while getting spanked by this thing. If you do end up playing this game, I would highly recommend trying the PvP, but maybe waiting a little bit later in the game. We have some more build options before doing it. The build I ended up having the most fun with, I think, during PvP was a little bit cheesy, but still pretty effective. Just a long-range, lightweight missile spam. Fantastic. Now, just because there's a lot of variety doesn't mean it's all good. In a game where the combat overall feels pretty solid, I think the only thing that's really holding it back is some poor weapon balancing, and in some cases, poor ammo economy. When I was experimenting, I started to notice that the weapon balancing felt a little off. Some weapons would feel like I'm trying to beat my enemies with a pool noodle, while others were like unleashing the power of the gods. And I get it, some weapons just aren't meant to be used with every type of build, and they all have their own unique strengths and weaknesses, but it still felt pretty bad to run around with the first handgun you unlock and just to run out of ammo halfway through the mission with nothing but your shoulder weapons left in your fists. Even if I did my best to conserve ammo, making sure to only fire when I have a clear shot, I would still run into issues in some of the missions, especially the longer ones. But when I swapped to something like the handheld missile launcher, I could spam the thing to my heart's content. And then you have the Gatling gun. This thing has almost no downside other than making sure not to overheat, and it absolutely shreds everything. Boss has a pulse shield? No problem. Put on 2 Gatling guns. Fighting a lot of enemies? No problem. Mow them down with plenty of ammo with a Gatling gun. Running these things trivialized a lot of the encounters and had me ask myself why use anything else. I was fighting a boss at the end of chapter 1 who had a pulse shield, and logic would dictate that you use the pulse gun. You know, the thing specifically designed to take care of shields. But with how fast it burned through ammo while taking out the shield, I found myself unable to finish the fight, even trying to use 2 of them with no such luck. Eventually, sitting on the pulse blade in one hand and the pulse gun in the other, crutching heavily on the melee to conserve ammo. Towards the end of the game, when I had to fight another boss with a pulse shield, I took the lessons learned from chapter 1 and just used 2 Gatling guns and 2 giant cannons and shredded the boss no problem. Alright, level design and graphics. It's a bit of a mixed bag. When zoning into missions, I pretty quickly started to notice the lack of detail in the environment. The best way I can think to describe it is imagine you're playing a game and you're looking at the out of bounds area. The area in the out of bounds is always noticeably lacking in detail compared to the playable spaces. Now imagine that lack of detail, but in large parts of the playable spaces. Buildings in some of the levels look like something I would have seen back in Halo 3, just gray and plain. Other things like large machinery or vehicles suffer from the same thing, weren't really as noticeable as the buildings. And this lack of detail also did no justice for the sense of scale. You're supposed to be this mech the size of a city building, but when everything around you looks like a cheap toy, it starts to diminish that sense of scale. With how good games are capable of looking these days, it just seems strange to put such low effort into the environment's detail. My best guess is they did it for performance reasons. But this looks worse than what I would have expected from a low graphics setting, and I was playing on high. Some of the missions also felt a little underwhelming, while others were pretty great. A few of the missions ended up being comically short and just reused a small section of a previous level.
Return to base.
That was a little short, could have been better. While others were pretty big, multi-stage areas with a sprinkling of exploration to find some hidden secrets. When exploring the bigger areas, one of the few issues I had was the stupid invisible wall that prevents you from exploring the rest of the zone. At one point, you're dropped into a massive city that just begs you to explore it, but you're really only able to move through a tiny section of it. Like, come on, From Software, you made this awesome looking space. Let me explore it. Let me walk around and see what you have to offer. There are quite a few levels I found myself bumping into these walls while trying to explore the zone, but beyond that, the medium-sized levels and the larger ones overall felt pretty good to explore, even though they lack the smaller details to bring them to life. When it comes to story, I don't really have anything negative to say about it. It had some really awesome moments, especially in chapters 4 and 5, and was interesting enough to keep me wondering how the ending would play out. It never really broke the mold, but wasn't terrible either. The voice acting at times did feel a little bit cringe, and sometimes you would have these weird, long, awkward pauses between sentences, but was good enough. The word I would use for the story would be adequate. It did the job it needed to do, no more, no less. Keep in mind, these are just my opinions. I do my best to be as honest about my experience as I can be, even if that means I come off as being a little harsh. I had plenty to complain about, but don't want to give off the wrong impression. I think the game as a package is a solid 7 out of 10. There's plenty of fun to be had. The combat and build options really carry the game and let you overlook some of the other issues I've already mentioned. There are a lot of things I wish they would have done a bit better, but the game still comes together nicely, and I do recommend giving it a shot.